Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Gaming the System, the podcast where three intersectional feminists examine gaming and games through a feminist lens. Today, I am your host, Matt, and I'm joined by my friends Alex and Jem. Before we get started, if you want to support us, you can subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/gamingthesystem for some exclusive content, or you can send us a one-off donation via PayPal to our email address wearegamingthesystem@gmail.com.
You can't play anything these days because we're looking at a rather fabulous resource that you could call them our foes, our opposition, the people who are against progressivism and diversity and equity and inclusion. And I'm going to do a PR thing. I don't know, I'll call it a PR thing. What I would do if I was satirizing what they're doing in a little while. Jem, you brought this to our attention before Christmas, the Woke Content Detector. This is a page on Steam, a curator page. We'll come into soon what a curator page is. And the person in charge of it and the team around them and the followers of that page have created a massive database of over 1,000 games with the goal of going through them and detecting woke content and then writing down what makes these games unsuitable and unadvisable and what makes them wrong and nasty and woke. Woke is such a stupid little word to describe what we're talking about as well. So fuck the word woke. Anyway, it's such a stupid little word. But that's what we're going to have to be contending with and saying a lot this episode. So to start off with, we need to decide what we think woke means. How do we define woke? How do you define woke?
Well, I believe it originated from Afro-American culture. I'm not sure exactly when, but it was like in the 1900s, to kind of define being aware of the barriers of racism and like social injustice. And then that expanded to include gender and you know, other marginalized groups. Usually it's defined as race, gender, religion, with no mention of disability whatsoever, because of course, I'll bang that drum again, disability is hardly ever included within the conversation, even though it is the largest marginalized group in the world. But that's how it kind of started, and then it became it was sort of mocked by the political right, and became a pejorative term for anything left politically, and right now it's really picking up steam, and the definition has expanded to include pretty much anything that right-wing people feel threatens their way of being and of living. Essentially, it's quite interesting to think about in terms of the evolution of the term and the way that language evolves and is appropriated by different groups, and how sometimes terms that were once derogatory have been taken and sort of reclaimed by certain groups. When you think about different words like the word queer, for example, or the term crip to describe disabled people rather than cripple. And those are examples of it kind of going in the opposite way, where a derogatory term has become a term of empowerment. Whereas now, I think woke, being a term of empowerment, has come back down to being a derogatory term used by those who feel it threatens their way of life, essentially. And that's kind of my take
so as you said,
how I would define
Alex, it kicked off back in in the 40s and 30s and 40s. Apparently, it was in a song by Lead Belly called Scottsboro Boys. And it's the lyrics go, I advise everybody to be a little careful when they go along through there. Stay woke, keep their eyes open. So, yeah, it's been around for ages, and then it sort of resurfaced again in the 60s and the 70s, and then it broadened out to mean racial justice and civil rights and Black consciousness, and then in the early 2000s and 2010s, it became utilized again. It was brought back in by the Black Lives Matter movement, and they used it in that, like they had hashtag stay woke, and things like that. So it meant, and that was more broad as well, bringing in sort of climate justice and sexuality and all of the things that we generally tend to put under the sort of DEI headline, and then became a slur, and was just hijacked, I guess, by the right. I think we've talked about it before on the podcast, and I think it is one of these words that it means a lot and nothing in one go. But I like the concept of it. I like this idea that you are enlightened, that you are awoken to these issues, because I think that a lot of the problems that we have are down to lack of education and lack of understanding around what it means to be mindful and considerate and empathic about people and their life experiences. So I like the concept, but it has obviously been horribly weaponized by the right, and it has become a very divisive word. And it's the same as politically correct. When we used to always talk about politically correct when I was growing up, everything was, it's too politically correct. And it's like, yes, no one says that anymore, but politically
That's
correct
really
is like
out of fashion now, hasn't it?
It's correct. It's like, this is something that we think is a good thing. And suddenly it's like, no, it's bad. And being awake, I mean, we're not going to get into the whole incel world, but isn't their whole thing about taking these pills to wake you up to the reality of life? And so, being woke, whichever side of the argument you're on, is obviously like a positive thing. And yet, here we are with this very complex word. So I think it's interesting, and when people do throw it around as an insult, and I think that, as is often the case, the left tend to kind of go, oh, okay, well, we'll just leave that word and move on. The amount of conversations I've had with people about whether we should just stop using the word feminism and things like that, and it just feels like we can't just keep giving up these words just because a bunch of right-wing people come along and have a problem with it. But on the other hand, is it the hill that we want to die on? I don't know.
The describing it as it means nothing and everything. It's not a defined thing. It's just an inelegant, blunt, big swing covering whatever you want it to mean. And it used to be, it's exactly the same as political correctness, just with a 21st century name that reflects the dumbing down and deterioration of the English language, which I'm sure I could talk to Chris for hours about, going, couldn't you just call it something all political correctness sounds Orwellian. It sounds like something you could have from communism, where you're going, well, I think it might actually be from Orwell. You go, there's the truth, and then there's the politically correct truth, the one that the government and the party decides what the truth is. What makes this group a fascinating, perfect in point to what this movement is, and that led us to have this conversation, is it's very rare that because we get on because we have shared interests and shared values. So we enjoy being in each other's company and being in the company of people who are like us or that we like, and we're open to other people. It's fine. We don't interact with people who think like this and believe this because we won't get on, because their values are antithetical to ours, and so we choose not to spend any time with them. And that means that we don't know what's going on inside their tent. And it's just a nasty place to think, I don't want to spend any time, like you're saying, with the incel movement. I don't want to go anywhere near that. I don't want to spend any more time than I need to thinking about it. But this is a little community that exists in digital form. It's part of Steam, and it has rules and guidelines, which I think blows my mind that you can have. It's like conspiracy theorists that have groups, and they meet up for little conferences, and they have to fly there or take trains there, and then someone has to bring the biscuits. There still has to be toilets. It's not all the stuff that if you were writing a novel about it, you wouldn't include all this stuff. So as you go through, I'm going to read out bits and bobs that are on this page. The first off, start with the discussion rules. They have discussion rules when their foundation is I should be able to say whatever I want, whenever I want, and I don't want to be censored. And so we'll go on to the list of what they count as woke in a moment. But bear in mind, this is the framework that they're setting up. This is the discussion rules written by the guy who created the page. And jump in at any point. We encourage civil, respectful discourse only. We cannot give Steam or Valve any reason to shut us down due to out-of-control memes or trolls. No ad hominem attacks will be tolerated. I'm assuming that means criticising someone else on the page. If people think their assertions are truly of merit, they should not have to resort to fallacious arguments and vitriolic attacks. And this group has a zero tolerance policy. If you violate these rules or Steam's discussion rules, you'll be giving a warning and your post will be deleted.
It's interesting. It's an interesting thing being a former forum moderator, who makes the rules and, what do they consider a breach of those rules? Obviously, this group is aligned politically one way, so I guess anything that is contrary to that would automatically put yourself in hot water, in the eyes of the moderators. If you're anti what that group is there for, then you're going to be causing trouble and stirring the pot, aren't you? Just by virtue of having differing views. It is a little odd, I have to admit, because most forums you have to try and be even-handed and kind of support both sides, and the time when you take action is when personal attacks occur. And the fun thing was trying to define what a personal attack was. And some people thought it was one thing, and clearly it's not. But they'll argue that it is. And so it's like, how do you even begin to place that when people will have their own ideas about what's breaking the rules? Separate to the moderators, you know? Yeah, I'm not really sure how that would work. I mean, what do they even... There must be barely any disagreements ever unless people who are on the left go in and try to disrupt them, I suppose. Otherwise, they'd all just be having very genteel discussions about
I think
what is or isn't
The
woke and be
Guardian
happy in
had
their
one of
little
the
bubble.
most
don't know.
comprehensive sets of community guidelines for their posts and their moderation, and many people would use that as a blueprint for forums, because it did detail all of these aspects that you're talking about, Alex, and go into them, because as you say, different people have different ideas on what these things mean. What struck me when I read those instructions, Matt, was that it's an effort, which is, I think we're seeing across the board from the right, to legitimize their position. They're working very hard to come across as very reasonable people who simply have a position, and it's something that is worth debating with them and discussing with them because they're reasonable. Yes. Yeah. So that was
Almost
really
to
what I was
sanitize
struck
themselves, isn't it?
by this,
Yeah.
that they're working very hard to be able to undermine what they believe to be their opposition, whilst trying to maintain a position of legitimacy and reasonable behaviour, which is, yeah, you could probably speak to a lot of domestic abuse experts about the psychology behind that kind of behaviour.
That's such a good point of the legitimacy and the reasonableness to it. And I've been watching... Have you watched SAS Rogue Heroes? It's fabulous. It's utterly fabulous.
No, but I think I know
Basically,
where you're going.
it's... As with... There are a lot of games making... slaughtering Nazis and fascists lads behaviour, and then I'm reading, going through some horrible books about the Nazis and Japanese in World War II, and the lesson that human beings are literally capable of anything. There's always a possibility of utter madness, horrors committed by humans, and it's not done in an animalistic way. It's done in a very reasonable and methodical way of say, well, we want to do this horrifying thing. When we talk about it, we're going to talk about how we're going to do it, the logistics of it, because these horrifying things don't happen with you need to be organized to do these horrifying things. And it really is just unsettling when looking inside a community like this. You go, it seems like a reasonable place. You could think that maybe these people could be reasoned with, but then you look outside of this, and now we're just going to look at a list of the things that they're against, And you think about the human cost of these positions that they want to enforce. Because what's happening in America at the moment is they're getting all their dreams are coming true, with Trump instituting literally everything on this list. And I've been thinking that how extreme could things get before people in these kinds of groups would go, oh, I didn't want it to go that far. Because we'll come on to in a bit later what they actually want to happen, what they think the answer to wokeism is, and they don't just want to complain about it. Because, right, we've got to start off with this list of how they define woke. And so the first one is pro-LGBT plus stuff. And just from the LGBT people that I've met and that are seen all over the world now, thankfully, thanks to media becoming more diverse, they want to go back to a time where there are no queer people seen anywhere. That's what they want. Their ideal game is one with no LGBT people in it. And then this is useful because then we can determine that this is what they want to happen in real life, which is where the problem comes in. They have a problem with it in their games, which means they have a problem with it in the real world. Yeah, just quite depressing. But fortunately, we are winning in terms of the culture war stuff.
I mean, I've had a look at that list, the basic terminology, and what I was really struck by was how there's a list of pro, and then there's a list, then it goes on to anti. And what I found really intriguing was the fact that in this list, pro is all the sort of the negative stuff, all the stuff that we know that anti-woke groups don't like, and all the anti stuff is all the stuff that is the stuff that they view woke groups as working against. And so they talk about about games being woke if they have pro-abortion messaging. But they also talk about anti-heterosexual messaging, and they don't talk about pro-life or pro-choice, because that would really mess up this whole thing. So whilst they're appearing to be very reasonable and mature in their approach to this and trying to kind of put this across in a legitimate and reasoned way, they are extremely biased right from the offset. You know, they hit the ground running, covered in a mess of bias, and you can't even argue it's unconscious. It's so clearly there. And I think the one thing that did really jump out at me, other than the way they phrased it, was where they talk about pro pedophilia messaging. No,
Yeah, that really stuck out to me. I couldn't get my head around that at all. I don't understand where that might have come from their point of view. Like,
no, back in the 70s, there was...
I don't get it. No, go on there.
When there was a push for, from the gay community, men, there was a publication that was being put out by paedophiles, and there was a terribly bad PR mix where there, for a moment, a few people thought that maybe they could all be in the same boat about getting things, society being more reasonable. So I understand it. That was extremely brief, and everyone was a bit kind of like, "Oh my gosh, what are we doing? This is crazy." But I think it's something that has never been forgotten by certain groups of society, and they've just made this link between homosexuality and paedophilia, which is obviously there is no link. They are very different things, and I think it's that's the only link that I can imagine that's led to this, and probably the people who spout this stuff don't know anything about that story. They've just heard rumors about X, Y, and Z, and it's just kind of turned into the sort of I heard it from a friend who heard it from a friend who heard it from a friend. Otherwise, I think that where it really falls down is that when you think like, well, Andrew Tate, one of the most alpha males in the world at the moment, apparently, according to himself, is up for sex with minors. That is the definition of paedophilia. So, it just feels, I mean, obviously that doesn't mean he has committed those crimes and it's all, being investigated. But I think it's people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. I think it's really interesting that they chuck that in there. And I also think because it's such an emotive topic, it's kind of like, well, obviously we're against things that are pro-paedophilia. But then also it's like, how many games... Well, the only games really that would probably promote any of that are like lots of the manga games, which we've talked about. Many of the games actually that we've talked about, I think, that would not probably make it onto this woke list. So
why this list?
Yeah.
No, you go ahead.
Exactly. The other bits that confused me from the list that I had to be like, well, what does that mean? Anti-human messaging. Anyone have any thoughts on that one? And then also anti-family messaging. I guess that depends on their definition of what family is. I'm not too sure. Those are the main ones that really stuck out as like, well, what does that mean?
It feels,
but
again,
those confused me.
The reason this list spoke to me so impactfully when I first saw it is, it's like we've cracked the Enigma code and we've just got a list through, this is the thought structure and strategy behind the enemy.
Yeah.
So everything on this list is what we now can confirm what they mean when they say woke. But then, so this is useful, and in going, right, we know our enemy now. But it becomes, the scale of the problem grows when you realize that all of these positions are the ones that right-wing media have chosen. They haven't come up with these things themselves. Right-wing media comes up with these things, these culture war issues, and then tells these people what to think. Because if you've ever watched, it's impossible to completely avoid right-wing news stuff. They have the exact same buzzwords constantly. They say the same couple of things over and over again, saying the word woke constantly. And the paedophile stuff is related to, so in the UK, there's this racist conspiracy theory of Muslim grooming gangs who just run paedophile rings. And then so we know that all of this stuff is they're parroting it from these right-wing sources, and then trying to rationalize it themselves in these groups like this. But then when we go into the thinking of it means everything and it means nothing, that's where the biggest danger is, because like you say, Jem, a lot of these things are completely subjective, and they're going, right, I like this, I don't like that. If someone thinks, I don't like cozy games, I found out, but I can explain why that is, and if someone tried to talk me around to it, I might go, maybe I'll try that one, or try this one, or whatever. I can talk about it. If, no matter what these things are, if the right-wing media that they follow completely 180'd on any of them, or changed the definitions of any of them, these people would go, oh yeah, I believe that now. And that's the most dangerous thing, because they say they're anti-pedophilia when Donald Trump went to Epstein's Island so many times. There are so many examples of him going and being around very young women, and him being bad stuff. And then Epstein, you'd think, Epstein, literally every famous person in America has a photo with Epstein and went to his island. You go, right, if you go to someone, right, do you like paedophilia? Are you pro paedophilia? And then you'd go, no, of course I'm not. And then you go, okay, so what should we do about it? What do you think the problem is? And he'll say, oh, the left wing like grooming gangs. And you go, we'll put a pin in that. What else about paedophilia? And then it just falls apart because they're just parenting something. But then you can't talk them out of it, and that's why it feels such a dangerous thing to me. In that they'll believe what they're told to believe, but it doesn't have to be objectively true. It can just be a buzzword that means they can do whatever they want.
Yeah, and I thought the bit to round off the list was all like really breezy sounding. It had like you say, like they're trying to present this reasonable facade. If you disagree with our definition of woke content, or you disagree with our association of that term with one of the above listed themes, feel free to join and let us know. Which,
God.
Okay, sure. What happens after I let you know? Yeah, it's very disconcerting.
It's such a fascinating list of things, and I'll give them the favor, which if this takes off, then it's I can't believe I'm the first person to come up with this idea. So you know what? Do you guys know what DEI stands for? And they say the amount of times that I've read DEI in preparation for this just makes me feel sick. Because every time I think of it, why wouldn't you, if you think that this is the death of society, woke's the death of society, why wouldn't you call it diversity, inclusion, and equality? You'd have DIE, wouldn't you? And that frustrates me unbelievably.
Yeah.
I can't believe how much it irritates me every time I see it. Why haven't you just done die? Why wouldn't you do that if you think this is the death knell of society? So, for fuck's sake. Then, yeah. So I don't know whether I'd be pleased or displeased if that all of a sudden started happening. I don't know if it would make a difference or what, but I think. So more interesting stuff on this is because we think culture war, we think of there's gay people, there's women, there's disabled people, all that stuff. That's what I would associate with culture war stuff and wokeism. But then they bring in political stuff and capitalist stuff. And you think, oh, that's the purely this is the messaging we've received from our media, because no one knows anything about communism, really. No one cares about communism, really. Communism hasn't worked. It's never worked. No one serious with anywhere near any backing wants communism, so it just doesn't matter. But that's what they've been told, because it goes, China, communist. Russia, communist. Bad. And socialism, these are the things that the right-wing media actually cares about, because socialism threatens their money and climate change threatens their money because they're the ones making money from it. And again, the cognitive dissonance of they would absolutely die on the hill of the definitions of these things, but then the opposite of them can be true and they would die for that as well. Like immigration stuff. Immigration, in America, who do you think employs all the illegal immigrants? The wealthy people do it.
Well,
because they haven't got any workers' rights. You can pay them less. That's
this is so many parallels with the book I'm listening to at the moment, Children of Men, which is about society, how society breaks down essentially when the human race can't have children anymore. And it's all about the UK. And they have what they call sojourners, that are basically immigrants from other countries that come in and do all the crappy jobs that no one wants anyone else to do, like cleaning and doing the bins and keeping the streets tidy and things like that. And the activist groups that are working against the powers that be in the UK were all advocating for the rights of the sojourners, and it had so many parallels with the way that some people in this country view immigrants and how other people are fighting for the rights of immigrants and things. So, and it's very, very prescient. But it was written I think in the 1990s. But it's still so relevant to right now. Scarily relevant, a lot of it. So I recommend reading it or listening to it if you prefer audiobooks. But it just really strikes me how similar.
It's wild.
The film's worth watching.
Yeah.
Fucking
I've not seen
bleak.
the film.
I think I only made it
watch
halfway
after
through.
we've finished.
Just because it's
it is bleak.
But yeah. Oh really? Well, yeah. I mean, it's not an easy listen, but it's fascinating to think about. You know, the way that the author was so
well, they did
spot on
they
with
did
everything, and it's still happening
engage
now.
with experts in the writing of it, I think. So, it's based on proper research. So futurology, which is, here about how they are applying these woke categories to games. How are they actually how are they actually implementing this, and what does it actually mean, and how many people, how impactful